to say that the only reality is the reality we can perceive is probably the most dangerous bullshit ever produced by the human intellect. It's a denial of humanity, first and foremost, and immediately afterwards, it's a denial of reality, because that it's simply not the case that everything that exists and is important appears on the screen of perception. When I fall in love, I don't see the love on my screen of perception. So there you go. What is probably the most driving part of human experience, and which certainly exists, not only exists, it drives history, it's not on the screen of perception. Now, isn't it extraordinarily stupid to deny that? It's almost a psychic illness to deny that. How much fear do you have to have about what you really, really are in order to deny yourself to that extent? It's an illness. These people are deserving of pity and require medical attention.
So what would you say is your understanding? What happens when we actually die? What happens to our mind? Or, well, our mind too. To localized mind, yes, to us.
I think what we call life, biology, metabolizing organisms, I think that is just the appearance, the image of a dissociative process in a form of extended phenomenal consciousness that underlies all nature. So when that extended consciousness dissociates a segment of itself, that dissociative process looks like something. Stuff that happens in nature have an image. They look like something when you observe them. And it so happens that what dissociative processes in that mind at large look like when you look at them is a living organism. It's biology. So in my view, life is just that. It's what dissociation in universal consciousness looks like when observed from a certain perspective, a certain point of view. So what is death? The end of life? Well, it's the end of the dissociation. It's a sort of great remembrance of what was going on before you were born. What you thought and felt and knew by acquaintance, not conceptually, before you were born. It's a sort of reintegration with a broader framework of subjectivity. I think that's what happens. Biology is the representation, the extrinsic appearance of a dissociative process in the mind of nature. And that is why I don't know what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda. And I will not know for as long as I am alive, because life is what dissociation looks like. So to go back to your previous question, what is it like to be in nature from a first-person perspective? Well, I don't think we can answer that for as long as we are alive, but when you are dead and that day is coming, you will know, because you will be it again. Death, the end of life, is the end of the dissociation, because dissociation is life is what dissociation looks like. So you will know, and I would even say you will remember, because you were that before you were born. You were in that unified state of mind. And we are all going back to being that. There is no escaping that part. I'm not fluent or even versed in the world's religious traditions or spiritual traditions. So I reserve judgment about what it must feel like to return to the original state of consciousness. I'll leave it at that. I don't know what it will feel like. But I would say with very high confidence that wherever it is, we will register it as a remembrance and not as a new fact. Because when you become less dissociated, you reintegrate things. And the way a reintegration feels like from a first-person perspective is a recall. We call it recall. I recall how it was. I recall this. I remember that trauma. It will be recall. Now, notice that going from a highly dissociated state to a less dissociated state is a trivial occurrence in life. It happens every day you wake up. When you are asleep and dreaming, you are dissociated. Even within your own personal mind, you are dissociated because you think you are your dream avatar. And you think that the trees and the houses and the cars and the other people are not you in the dream. When you wake up, your dream avatar dies. and you realize that you were doing the whole thing. It was your mind doing the whole thing, but nobody goes around crying and mourning the death of their dream avatar. So, so that's a reason to be optimistic. The I am is core subjectivity. That's how analytic philosophers call it today. And Nisargadatta had his eyes on the ball. If the physical universe is a representation of the mental activity of the divine mind, if he wants to use that word, then the physical universe, the inanimate universe, is the body of God, because that's what bodies are, representations of inner mental activity. And therefore, if you want to see God, to see is an appeal to perception. It's an appeal to acquaintance through the intermediation of a dashboard, through the intermediation of representation. So, in that sense, to see God is to see the universe, because the physical, inanimate universe is the body of God, is the representation of God. It's the only way you can perceive God. So if you want to see God, look up to the stars at night, and you are seeing the mental processes of the divinity's mind. But if you want to go further, if you want to remove the intermediation, if you don't want the representations, you want to become acquainted with the thing in itself, as it is in itself, then you need to be God. Because to experience, to know God from a first-person perspective is to be a God. So Nisargadatta, despite his only 2 years of basic school education, he had his eyes right on the ball. It's amazing. It makes philosophers with 2 PhDs like me very humbled, because we've been left in the dust by someone who had 2 years of school education. Christianity is the one thing that resonates with us, that's telling us all the time, it's not about you. And if we can re-engage with it, it's ours, it's our inheritance, it belongs with us. If we can just re-engage with it and not alienate ourselves from it so much. Happiness is grace. It's not something that you conquer. Don't take that responsibility on your shoulders. It will crush you, inevitably. Don't do that. Happiness is grace. It doesn't come from you, it's granted to you as an act of natural grace. And life is sacrificial. Life is a service to something that isn't you. Something that moves within you. You think it is you, but it's not. It's not personal. It's a segment of a whole that is incomprehensible to us. And Christianity too. You don't need to understand it. It's good that you try to understand as much as you can, but you don't need to understand it fully. So don't give up just because you don't understand, because you're a monkey running around a rock with an intellect for only 30,000 years. There's nothing. It's yesterday. The intellect was just born. We don't need to understand the ways of the divine mind in order to be willing to serve. And this service is not something that would chain you. It's precisely the opposite. The service is not something that devalues you. It's precisely the thing that values you as an instrument, as a means to a great end. Because you see, what we get wrong is that we think that we are devalued if we work towards a goal that is not meant for our own personal happiness. And what we only realize after we achieve that fictitious goal is that our own personal happiness means precisely nothing. If you conquer everything you want to conquer in your life, after you're done with it, and after you've spent 2 months drunken in that success, you will certainly realize that, shit, that was not it. That was not it. You get your billion, you get your trophy wife, you get your Ferrari, you get your yacht, you get your multiple houses, and after the dust settles, oh shit, it was not about it. That's not it. There's still a hole in your chest. And then we get confused and desperate because we don't have another recipe. We don't have another manual. What else to do? What else to do? Well, we don't have the other manual because we lost it. We lost Christianity. we turned it into a cartoon. And then we say, oh, it's a cartoon, it's bullshit. Yeah, the cartoon is bullshit. But we made the cartoon. We made the cartoon of it. And let's be honest, church officials made a cartoon of it as well. So the institution has a lot of blame to carry for the deplorable state of our religion.
Today's scientist, Bernardo Kastrup, has 2 PhDs, one in computer science and one in philosophy. He worked at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, Phillips Research Laboratories, and is currently a writer for Scientific American. Kastrup's philosophy of rational idealism, life after death, and his desire for Western society to readapt Christianity might seem strange to hear coming from a writer at Scientific American, but it's becoming increasingly frequent these days. According to Professor Donald Hoffman, this is due to the fact that humanity has found what he likens to the monolith from 2001, A Space Odyssey.
So it's interesting. It's a geometric object. It's static. It's just sitting there. It's this monolith beyond space-time. Its volumes are the scattering probabilities or amplitudes, and its geometric structure codes for locality and unit properties of space-time. And then behind the amplituhedron, even deeper, they found these things called decorated permutations,
right,
which are the deepest core somehow from which the amplituhedron gets its structure that codes for these properties of objects in space-time. So but these just, there's no dynamics now. We've let go of space-time. We've taken our first baby steps into the realm beyond space-time, and what we see are these monoliths. They're just sitting there, pregnant with meaning, but no dynamics. So we're very much like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where there's the monolith there, and there's the apes.
Yeah.
They see it, they're first scared of it, and then they pound on it, and they're screaming at it, and they're jumping all. Yeah. They know that it's something important, but they're clueless, and we're sort of in that same. We found these wonderful monoliths, but who ordered that, and why? Why the amplituhedron, and why aren't we seeing no dynamics? It's just these rocks, these geometric objects beyond space.
Sure.
In mathematics and high-energy particle physics, an amplituhedron is a geometric structure introduced in 2013 by Nima Akani Hamed and his student Jaroslav Trenka. According to Wikipedia, amplituhedron theory challenges the notion that space-time locality and unitarity are necessary components. Instead, they are treated as properties that emerge from underlying phenomenon. Let me say that again in English. The monolith is telling us that everything we see is a projection that emerges from some place that is neither here in this location or now in time. Let's try that one more time. Everything you see, touch, feel, hear, smell, and even your body itself does not exist in a place or a time, but is emerging or coming out or projected from somewhere else. In layman's terms, you are in Plato's cave. These days, everyone knows what Plato's cave is. They made a movie about it called The Matrix.
He's the one.
Does that mean that I believe that we are living in the Matrix? Nope, I'm not a Platonist. I'm just somebody who is trying to quote the world's top scientists and convert their technical jargon into a more simplified language. I used to have a newspaper column and did a lot of technical writing in the medical device field. It wasn't until my 30s that I became a full-time music photographer. Back to Professor Hoffman's claim that we have found the monolith from 2001, A Space Odyssey. What does this mean? Well, it means a sea change, a paradigm shift. In Arthur C. Clarke's Space Odyssey series, monoliths are machines in black cuboids built by an unseen extraterrestrial species whom Clarke dubbed the Firstborn, and who are the earliest highly intelligent species to evolve in the Milky Way. In an interview in 1969 with Joseph Gelmas, Stanley Kubrick said, "From the very outset of the work on the film, we all discussed the means of photographically depicting an extraterrestrial creature in a manner that would be as mind-boggling as the being itself. When you perceive the monolith, it appears a non-living object. But if we look through the lens of Kubrick's answer, he calls it a photographic depiction of an extraterrestrial creature. The importance of this clue cannot be overstated. The amplituhedron is a shape, but if we compare it to the monolith, it would be something that is alive, but which appears to be inanimate. Kubrick further went on to state, the reason his alien life form looks like a monolith and not like some bug-eyed rubber creature was because Kubrick believed that truly advanced beings would probably have shed the chrysalis of a biological form at one stage in their evolution. In Kubrick's film, the monolith is depicted in the opening scene as teaching the apes to use tools or weapons. This is a key principle anthropologists and biologists point to as signs of conscious learning in life forms, the use of tools. From the encounter with the battling apes and the jawbone, he fades to a transformative shot comparing the tool of the bone to a ship floating through space. The ship being a more advanced tool that humans will use to locate the monolith on the moon. Thus begins the great journey of bringing the monolith to Jupiter, which is indeed symbolic, Jupiter being another name for Zeus. The ensuing battle between Dave and the ship's AI, HAL 9000, is a big part of most people's takeaway from the movie, but then they might be missing the overarching story of the transformation of man, and not by the poorly functioning AI, which could only ever be another machine built by men, but instead transformed by the teaching of the monolith, the one that started with the jawbone and the use of tools, and ends with Kier Delay, aka Dave, in a state of advanced age, transformed from the black coat of the ape to the white coat of enlightenment, transformed by technology to be reborn among the stars, passing through the door of the monolith, onward to see Jupiter.
My God, it's full of stars.
Bernardo Kastrup, the computer scientist who worked at CERN, has something to say about this, what it's like to see God.
If the physical universe is a representation of the mental activity of the divine mind, if we want to use that word, then the physical universe, the inanimate universe, is the body of God, because that's what bodies are, representations of inner mental activity. And therefore, if you want to see God, to see is an appeal to perception. It's an appeal to acquaintance through the intermediation of a dashboard, through the intermediation of representation. So, in that sense, to see God is to see the universe, because the physical, inanimate universe is the body of God, is the representation of God. It's the only way you can perceive God. So if you want to see God, look up to the stars at night, and you are seeing the mental processes of the divinity's mind. But if you want to go further, if you want to remove the intermediation, if you don't want the representations, you want to become acquainted with the thing in itself, as it is in itself, then you need to be God. Because to experience, to know God from a first-person perspective is to be a God.
Kastrup's experiences in the field of computer engineering and philosophy have brought him back to the ancient secret of the pyramid. His philosophy that human beings are the disassociated consciousness of the divine mind is not new by any means. It is an ancient philosophy, mirrored in the religious practice of humans throughout history. Religious theories from the ancient Egyptians cutting the god of Osiris to pieces, and the Aztec teaching of the warrior god who was born out of his mother's womb to defend his mother from his attacking sister, clad at birth in full armor and with a sword. He cut his sister into pieces, casting her body down the serpent's path of the mountain. Kastrup mentioned that if you led your life for material success, that you would wind up finding that that wasn't the purpose of life at all. He specifically said that you would have a hole in your chest. The Aztecs crusted their idols with jewels, but left a hole in their center. It was into this hole they would plunge the still beating heart of the humans they sacrificed. So, in the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, the monolith has always been a mystery. There is always a focus on how the AI, that progression of the AI story, but the true understanding of the film is taught by understanding what the monolith represents. And this is where the story is about to get very personal, because the monolith that is meant to transform humanity into the next evolutionary stage just happens to be the thing you are holding in your hand. The monolith, the black mirror that allows you to download the knowledge of the world, collated and indexed by machine learning systems we have created, which will further illuminate our scientific theories and ideas. For over a decade, they've been saying that the new gold rush is your personal data. Why? Well, maybe because life is not a collection of moments in time that occur and pass away, but the creation of a soul born through experience in this world, fighting for a chance to become something greater. That ancient story of Pinocchio trying to become a real boy, or Jack climbing the beanstalk, bringing down first the gold and then the source of the gold, and finally understanding of a higher order, the harp. These deep and rich philosophies are even woven into our children's stories. Maybe that's so we'll remember that you've got to be like a child to see. Stanley Kubrick's movies are littered with metaphors, symbolism, and esoteric meaning, in which he tried to communicate a hidden truth to his audience. And the symbolic truth Kubrick is trying to share was closely akin to what the scientist with 2 PhDs was saying in the beginning of this video. This is something the great writers of all time have tried to impart to humanity. The Matrix, Gulliver's Travels, The Lord of the Rings, all of these iconic archetypal stories have a foundation that runs through them. The philosophy of Plato, who received the secret knowledge of the pyramid in Alexandria, Egypt, much like Moses encountered his early years of instruction and trial in Egypt, or how Jesus fled the assassination of King Herod to Egypt in his early years. They say Parmenides was the only Western philosopher to think being qua being, but maybe you can add Kubrick to that list. They say that the outcomes of being are so alarming that the thinking of being itself became a scandal, an ontological horror, such that the thinking of being had to become something, thinking something else, anything else. The forms of Plato, thought thinking itself of Aristotle, God, let anything be being except being, they thought. Parmenides' revelation of the goddess was that either we must choose what is, or being, or we must choose what is not, or non-being. Specifically to attend to truth, we must choose to think being or think non-being, as these are the only 2 routes of inquiry. The goddess in Parmenides' writing frames this disjunction as logically foundational. Before all thought can proceed to truth at all thought must think being. In fact, it must only think being. Why? Because to think what is not, to think non-being, is only possible if one mistakenly conceives of what is not as something which is an object of possible thought. Non-being is nothing, no thing, literally a non-something, even as an object of thought. So it cannot even be an object of thought. The goddess says, Togar altan no same, Eastern te kai anai. This is so because thinking and being are the same. Truth is simply thinking being because there's nothing else to be thought, and there's nothing else to do the thinking, and this opens unto the true amazing vistas of the metaphysical revelation, and it begins us down the road of its truly startling conclusions. That is to say, that the world that is given to us in sensation, the world of reality, of change and becoming, this is all a delusion, a mere doxa, an opinion, and all that truly is purely being, which is arrived at solely through thought, which, like anything, the self-same as being. Thus, by ignoring the delusion of sensation, informed experience, and turning to pure thought in the form of deductive logic, then and only then do we arrive at truth. What then are the truths of being? There are 4. There is no coming to being. There is no ceasing to be. There is no alteration or change within being. There is no movement, and there is no plurality. There is only that which is, and that which is only numerically identical to itself. 1. The hidden meaning of 2001: A Space Odyssey really comes down to this one shot. The camera and the crew are clearly visible in the actor's glass visor reflection. This shot would normally use a zoom lens to move the camera away into a shadowy area that wouldn't reflect, but Kubrick deliberately would have chosen this lens to get this close, to communicate the secret of 2001, which is essentially that it is the Truman Show, and that Dave now fully understands the words of Shakespeare. All the world is a stage, and we are merely players. You know, I don't really buy into any of these theories. They're esoteric and essentially monism, which, where I come from, is a heresy. The book of Psalms says that God created the universe through wisdom, which is basically synonymous with the philosophy of idealism, right? That the Creator makes the world by thinking it. This is at least an approximation of the philosophies of Chomsky, Donald Hoffman, Bernardo Kastrup, Christopher Langan, Nima Akani Hamed. This philosophy also just won the Nobel Prize about 8 months ago, that local realism is false. So it's got legs. According to Professor of Philosophy John Vervaeke, the movie The Matrix is about the readaptation of Platonic ideas, where Neo stands for Neoplatonism and Trinity stands for the Christian Church. The union of the two is supposed to bring about the new philosophical aeon. The funny thing to me is how good chunks of the world's top scientists have followed the theory of evolution and high-energy particle physics back to the ancient teachings of the mysteries. Calvary Chapel just held a baptism at Pirates Cove a few weeks ago, and I heard that they had their biggest crowd in history, somewhere around like 4,000 people asking to be baptized. There is a revival afoot in this land. People are realizing that they have been told lies, and they are ready for the paradigm shift of science back to an acceptance of the metaphysical or spiritual realm to occur, as predicted by Dr. Wolfgang Smith of MIT. One time at the Chinese Theater, I covered an event for 2001: A Space Odyssey where Keir Dullea, the actor who played Dave, was in attendance. I was invited as press to cover the event, and I was the only one, so I stayed with Keir the whole time. Got photos of him signing autographs for people and took a few portraits. After everyone had filtered into the theater, he and I waited outside chatting and looking at the photos on the back of my camera. Before I went inside, he handed me an iconic photo of himself. When I read the inscription, I was humbled and thankful, that he had autographed it for me. This was at the Chinese Theater, which is a huge place. The previews were just ending when I sat down in the back. I planned to watch the movie and then get some pictures of the interview with Keir after the show. Just as the first scene began to illuminate the screen, the red doors at the back of the theater opened and Keir, aka Dave, tapped me on the shoulder, said excuse me, and shuffled past into the seat next to me. I haven't seen this movie in 30 years, he leaned over and whispered to me. At the time I didn't think much of it. This was not really a rare occurrence for me. I covered events like that a lot. Looking back on it now, it almost seems poetic. Watching 2001: A Space Odyssey while sitting next to Dave, being qua being, what else have you got?
Hello, hell, do you read me? Hello, hell, do you read me? Do you read me, hell?
film. Affirmative, Dave. I read you.
Throughout this whole experience of living with this film throughout these 50 years, one of the most common questions is, what does this film mean? What is the ultimate meaning of this film? And I just thought that Stanley gave an answer once, which I think is kind of interesting. He said, when you listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, in words, what's it about? What does it mean? It's unanswerable, because every human being that listens to that music has a slightly different reaction depending on the persona of the person hearing it. And he said that 2001 is a visual symphony. And the proof of the pudding is, not that he said this, when you hear the Blue Danube, I'm sure many of you, knowing this film, think of space. But if someone has never heard of 2001: A Space Odyssey, here's the Blue Danube, what will they probably think of? Vienna? A river? Which one of those two people is correct?
Cue Johann Strauss and the Blue Danube.
I have my own theories. Everyone has their theories. I've read all the books. What do you think happened?
Well, mine is probably more mundane because I had a script, and my own interpretation was the fact that this film, in part, is about transition. We see the first transition where primitive man discovers the first weapon, and that is the first sign that there's going to be a major change. And that just continues at the end of the film. It's yet another major change.
But what happens to Bowman? This is what I always thought. Okay. Tell me how wrong I am. I always thought once he experiences this, trip, that the alien intelligence behind the monolith, he's in that sort of strange kind of Hilton hotel.
Yeah.
That weird, and he lives his entire life out.
Interesting you mentioned Hilton Hotel, because in the original script it mentioned Hilton Hotel. Oh yeah. They changed it to the look that you saw, because how many Hilton hotels have great paintings like that?
And also that wonderful...
But originally it was going to be a Hilton Hotel, and any wording in it was going to be blurred purposely. You couldn't quite make out what anything said. My interpretation of that is that the alien presence, with being millions of years in advance of us, what do we do when we capture a polar bear? We put him in a zoo, and we build an artificial cave and an artificial pond to make him feel at home. Well, maybe one day I walked through the Louvre Museum and saw these paintings in a room like that. Well, the aliens just maybe programmed or read my mind by some advanced
process. You think that's the cage thing?
And that they said, well, I didn't know it was the Louvre, but we'll make him feel comfortable. So they made that room. But it's really a metaphor. I don't think it's a literal room. It's a metaphor for the transformation from the human that I am when I begin that transformation to the fetus at the end.
Which is what?
The next stage, just as what's going to happen after the Moon Watcher, which is the name of the ape. What's going to be the next step? Well, the next step is what we see in the center part of the movie, which is modern man.
Here, Dave is going to reach for the edge of the screen. If he touched the edge of the screen, that would be called breaking the fourth wall. Kubrick draws attention to this by breaking the glass. In the next scene, we see Dave in the white clothing of the Enlightened One. Now, the fourth wall will be deliberately broken. The camera is positioned outside of the room, and then Dave's going to attempt to break the fourth wall to touch the screen again. the screen of the monolith. In this last part, it cuts away, but he's going to touch it there. And it is going to be by touching the screen that he is transformed. It is the teaching of the monolith that transforms him. And what is that teaching? Being qua being. When he finally remembers who he is. From a scientific point of view, this would be the theory that consciousness is fundamental, and that the one who transcends his body through enlightenment can change not just the world, but the universe. And what is it that the amplituhedron has taught the scientists? The same thing.